My name is Kristen Bizayo. I am a professor of leadership studies at the Jepson School. This is Moisés Kaufman. He is here to talk with us for the Jepson Forum speaker series. This year's series title is Culture Shock. It's about culture and leadership and how those two interact. I guess I'd like to start out really by asking you how you came up with the idea for Tectonic.
Tectonic was born out of this discontent that I was feeling with theater in America. I felt that a lot of the work that I was seeing on American stages were really naturalism or realism. So everything that I was looking at on stage had a kitchen sink and a sofa. And to me, what I started wondering is why these forms, which are really 19th century forms, right? So at the time that we assigned the birth of naturalism, which is in the late 1890s and beginning of 1900s, Impressionism was the visual art form that was in vogue then. Since Impressionism, we've had Post-Impressionism, Dadaism, Futurism, Surrealism, Op art, Pop art, Postmodernism, all of these ways in which we have changed our relationship to the canvas. So why is it that while all the other art forms have evolved, so much of our work is still grounded on those forms? So the purpose of the company in Tectonic means the art and science of structure. Mm-hmm. It's all about form. Was to kind of question what can happen on the stage. What are the new theatrical vocabularies? What are the new theatrical forms? How can we have a theater that uses all of the power of that thing we call theatricality? Because I think that film and television now do realism and naturalism better.
Yeah.
So it is a desire to kind of revisit what is the thing that theater can do that only theater can do, and how do we speak best, and what is it about our language and our vocabulary that can elucidate something about the world in which we live and the human condition more clearly.
And one of the things I really like about a lot of the work that you guys have been doing is this concept of the moment work, that moving from one moment to the next, and sometimes fluidly, sometimes a little bit less fluidly, intentionally so. And I was wondering how that creates a different impression or a different purpose for the audience, or from the audience's perspective. So what is the reason that you've chosen to go with those forms instead of something that's more narratively fluid from start to finish?
Well, I think that when I started posing questions about how do we explore theatrical vocabularies, how do we explore theatrical forms, the first thing that I thought was, well, let's choose a moment on stage and see how a moment can speak, right? And a moment is, of course, a unit of time, but it's also a unit, for us, it's a unit of theatrical time. Mm-hmm. And what thinking in terms of moments allows you to do is to construct building pieces that are inherently theatrical. So a lot of the work that you see right now on stage is work that happens because somebody writes a play and then gives it to somebody else, who's a director, who goes into another room and stages the play. So everything is text-based, right? The text leads everything. And what I think we're trying to do is we're trying to say, obviously, that's a very valid form. Shakespeare, Williams, Miller, this is a form that has been proven over and over to be very valid. I am interested in what happens when you begin to write in the rehearsal room, and when you begin to write with all of the theatrical elements. And, in Tectonic's work, we have often collaborated with writers who have been trained in those other forms. Mm-hmm. My collaboration with Doug Wright, for example, who was a writer who's a magnificent wordsmith and a great dramaturg, led to I Am My Own Wife, which is really, on stage you can see the melding of both theatrical vocabularies. An exquisitely sophisticated text and also a very rigorous and sophisticated theatrical vocabulary. And I think where those two meet, you have something that is uniquely theatrical.
One of the things that we've been talking about a lot this year with the forum, but also talking about it beginning even with last year's forum, is we had a gentleman out named Kurt Toffland, and he runs a program called Shakespeare Behind Bars, where he uses theater as a means of rehabilitation for inmates. And we have something, it's sort of my baby, is the Jepson Shakespeare Project, where we have our students working with at-risk youth, and we actually used half youth and half elderly population this year, using theater as a way to try and teach certain values. Do you see something similar with some of the work that you've done, either with Tectonic or outside of Tectonic? Are you trying to reach your audience ideologically, or is it much more about raising questions about how form reshapes the way that we think about content?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. But
Okay.
I would say that what I am interested in is very much the notion that theater can participate on a national dialogue.
Okay.
That while up to now, film, television, and the internet are the things where we hope to have a conversation about national events, I want to propose that theater is a place where we can have those conversations. And that leads to two things. Theater, a place where you can indeed have a public square where we can not only hear different opinions, but hear them in voices of actors who are alive and present in front of you. And the idea that the actor as a vessel for this kind of conversation is a particularly well-suited event or structure. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is that, yes, I think it's very hard to talk about new ideas using old forms. I think that if you look at an impressionist painting and all of a sudden it's trying to tell you about representation, it's going to be very hard because you associate, we live in a culture that we can read aesthetics very clearly and very quickly. So if something looks like something that you know, it's very hard for you to believe that it will be providing a new discourse. We associate discourse with aesthetics, which, you know, a lot of people will say that they are inextricably linked. But whether they are or not, we associate aesthetics with discourse. And so what that does is that it forces me as a theater artist to say, well, if I'm interested in posing new ideas and new discourses and new ways of looking at the world, I have to do it by rigorously examining the aesthetics of the work that I make.
And so how do you view yourself, just to bring it a little bit to the questions of leadership,
Yes.
how do you view yourself as a leader within either the theatrical community or possibly both, within that national discourse on specific questions or just general questions of where we think we're going as a nation, where our culture and our society is leading?
Yeah, this question of leadership is something that is very important to me and that I've given a lot of thought to. I think that within the theatrical community, the more rigorously I question what I do and the more rigorously I question the status quo, the more I can influence the development of the art form. You know, I always tell my students that if you are only thinking about the next play that you're going to write, direct, act in, you're doing all of us a great disservice. But if you think of how is that piece going to contribute to a dialogue about the art form, then we're beginning to think in the right way, I think, or in a more constructive way. So that's number one. And number two, in terms of the national dialogue, I think that the works of Tectonic Theater Project, I would like to believe, that between Gross Indecency, The Three Trials of Oscar Wilde, and Laramie Project, and I Am My Own Wife, and even 33 Variations, that we are empowering the communities that perform these plays to participate in these dialogues. And by that I mean that when you see a film, you have a conversation with the film for the 2 hours that you're there, and then you talk about it with your friends for an hour, and that's the end of that experience. When performers perform the Laramie Project, as you know, they spend 6 to 8 weeks working on the production. That means that they have to imbue themselves in the material. They have to become experts, not only about the people of Laramie and Laramie, but about the ideas in the play. So I am very encouraged when I think that, you know, a 13-year-old girl in a high school somewhere is doing the Laramie Project, and the table conversation at her household is about, you know, sexual orientation. It is about gender identity, and it's about social justice, and it is about how do we renegotiate the social contract under which we live. All of a sudden, I think that the arts can have a profound leadership in the world in which we live, because they allow conversations to happen in a way that neither politics nor religion can do.
I like that it's a very different way of having that conversation, almost as though you're sneaking it past people in a way. That idea that we're almost more receptive to having those conversations if we don't expect to have them.
Well, I don't think it's sneaking it past people. I think that one of the things that theater does is that it humanizes us, and that it civilizes us, and that it makes us more keenly aware of the social contract under which we live. And by doing that, a lot of the times I'm asked, in your work, what do you want people to do after they see your work? And I always say that the great thing about theater is not what it makes people do, but what it makes of people.
Okay.
And by that I mean that it humanizes people, and that being exposed to the arts has a humanizing influence and a civilizing influence. And that those are the things that by getting in touch with our humanity, perhaps the greatest conversations can start out of that context.
That's fantastic. And it's so fantastic that I'd like to end the conversation on that one. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.